So today I'm going to be talking about the latest advances, as we can see here in longevity biotech, drug discovery, and AI. A little bit about me to start off with. So I did my undergrad at Emory University in biology. And my focus was in research during my undergrad was in studying mechanisms related to the effects of lifestyle factors on inflammation, oxidative stress, and certain markers of aging. And then I went on to do a little bit of research post graduating, and that was in partially in drug discovery and then looking at the effects of mindfulness meditation. After that, I went on to do grad school. I did a PhD at Georgia Tech in bioinformatics with a heavy emphasis and focus on machine learning, specifically, deep learning neural network models. And I worked with very, very large scale data, ranging from various types of omics, as well as electronic health records, and worked on interpretability of these AI models for, biological applications and biomedical applications, and data quality control, and figuring out how do you, modify how these data sets are inputted into or processed so they can be inputted into a model for, effective results. And I also did some work in the startup space before, as you can see here on the left. And then I also spent some time working at GSK, getting exposed a little bit to the pharmaceutical industry. So right now I am co-founding a currently stealth mode biotech specifically in the area of longevity, AI, and drug discovery. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So just to start and just kind of sort of preface everything, for basically literally the entire history of humanity, we've thought of aging as basically a fact of life. It can't be modulated, and that's been our thought process. And when we think of, sort of the stages of life, we start with early life growth and development, then we achieve peak vitality in the early to late 20s, so peak bone density, muscle strength, and other components of physiology are at their best, and then slowly over the following decades we see in virtually everyone age-related declines that occur over time in immune function and other aspects of physiology. And as we all kind of probably know, aging is arguably the #1 biggest risk factor for a very large number of chronic diseases. As you can see here, over the span of Middle Ages and beyond, the rates of heart attacks, heart disease, cancer, stroke, and Alzheimer's disease, and many, many more just sort of skyrocket. And we can also see this in this figure here. We see age over time, right? And we see that maybe starting in the 20s, if we follow actually this blue line here, deaths due to diseases basically skyrocket. And the important thing to note about this image here is that it's exponential, right? It's a logarithmic scale. So we're looking at an exponential increase in mortality caused mainly by diseases, as well as some external causes like falls, for example. And this begins, in the early 20s or late teens even. And so clearly it's a problem, and there's been a lot of interest in this idea of increasing the health span. What is the health span? So let's look at first, lifespan versus health span, right? If you look at the lifespan, let's think of let's say maybe around 90 years, for example, if someone sort of lives until the age of 90, right? The health span is, and this is a very simplistic diagram, but the health span is basically how many of those years are actually healthy years, years where individuals are completely disease-free. And so, eventually, people started to accrue morbidities, right? Diseases. And this sort of gains momentum over time. So once you have one, you're very likely to have more that sort of pile on in the years after. And so these are not good quality years, right? And so we want to ultimately increase the health span. We want to increase the number of healthy years. And just to give you perspective on the economic value of this, it's huge. Even just 1 year, if you imagine the entire global population increases in the quality of, or basically in one more year of healthy living, that is literally worth $38 trillion, according to a recent study by some of the thought leaders in the space. And so this is just 1 year, and this is related to the high cost of of chronic illness that occur and that accrue in the healthcare system, right, and treating chronic illnesses that occur with age. So, stepping back a little bit, let's look at some definitions. So when we talk about, and there's been a lot of talk about these two words, basically, right, longevity biotech. So when we talk about longevity biotech, what does it mean? And the reality is that we're so early in this industry that there's no formal consensus on a definition. However, I really like this definition that was proposed by one of the founding partners of one of the VC firms that specializes in longevity called Healthspan. So what this is basically it's the idea of developing therapies, so basically drugs or treatments that can treat and prevent, and importantly, more than one age-related diseases at the same time. So we're looking at not just one disease, which is, a lot of biotech focuses on, a specific disease. We're talking about treatments that are sort of more broad or almost like platform in a way, right? In the sense that they can treat more than one. And then we're also, as we just saw before, health span, we're trying to, in longevity biotech, look for therapies that can increase the number of healthy years, disease-free years, right? And companies in this space, as per this definition, they do that by targeting specific cellular or molecular mechanisms or pathways related to aging itself, right? So this isn't, looking at how a specific disease manifests itself, but more going to the core and to the root of how aging occurs. And so that's an important distinction. And to give you perspective on the very large amount of hype that has been building in the space for the past 5 years or less, last year, or in 2023, it was first announced. There's this major competition. There's the X Prize. It's been around for a while, but they decided recently they wanted to introduce a component of the competition focused on healthspan. So they are investing over $100 million to basically give people about 7 years to basically, work on this competition to try to see if anyone can successfully develop a therapeutic that restores muscle and cognitive and immune function by at least 10 years in middle-aged individuals to elderly individuals. And so there's a lot of money that's pouring into this. There are a lot of big funders from well-known billionaires that are investing in this space. In Saudi Arabia, for example, is investing or plans to invest $1 billion a year in this space as well. And the important thing to note here is that a lot of the investment that is occurring in this space is quote unquote smart money, in the sense that we're looking at a lot of tech billionaires. They're either investing in companies that are in the space, or they have started their own investment groups that are in the space. And then we look at also, we're looking in the past less than 5 years, big venture funds that have started to invest from Andreessen Horowitz, Coastal Ventures, and others. And then, of course, there's also big pharma. This isn't a traditional area in which big pharma has invested in because, and for reasons that I can talk about later. But we do see that big pharma has been starting to take an interest in this. So let's step back and let's look at longevity biotech in a few numbers. This was adapted by a couple sources of investors and people that are very influential in this space right now. So in total, longevity biotech has achieved at least, as of 2023, $13 billion in collective venture funding or investment funding in general. And there are now over 30 longevity-focused venture capital or investment funds as of 2025. Over 170 longevity biotech startup. This was as of 2023. There is probably a lot more at this point. I would say maybe over 200. And important to note as well, and this is just interesting for having sort of a comparison point of the size of this industry versus biotech overall. The valuations, at least as of 2023, were less than 50 billion in total. And we can compare this to the overall biotech valuation. It's over 5.4 trillion. So just in perspective, even as much as this industry is growing very, very quickly, it's still very much is a small fraction of the size of the overall biotech industry. But that said, there is clearly a lot of interest that it has been growing very quickly in this space. So just a little bit about how the playbooks of longevity biotech, how these businesses are structuring their business models ultimately to be successful. Right. And so one of the main ones, and this is the most common one, is if you're trying to develop a drug that is supposed to make you live longer and tackle age-related diseases, right now, the reality of the matter from the regulatory side is that the FDA and the WHO historically have not considered aging per se as a disease. So there's a lot of movement towards trying to modify that, and some people are doing that. But right now, if you have a drug that is targeting some of these age-related pathways, the idea is that, well, most likely, and if it is a truly bona fide longevity biotech drug, as per that definition, it should be applicable for multiple different diseases, right? So once you get a drug approved for one condition that is age-related, if this is truly a sort of platform, for lack of a better word, platform sort of drug, then, the idea would be that you can expand, into different disease indication areas with the same drug. And so this is, a play that is really common amongst longevity biotech startups that have popped up. And we have a couple others. So for example, there's a movement for pet life extension. There's a company called Loyal in the Bay Area that focuses on this, and they're trying to make your dogs live longer. And then there's targeted market entry. So this is, companies that, they're developing skincare products or supplements, but and importantly, these products are designed so that they do target mechanisms related to aging. So they're very, very specific to, to these tapping into these pathways, right? And finally, there's some B2B, and this is less, I guess, high return, arguably, potentially, in terms of, value, but there's massive amount of value that comes out of it. So for example, there are companies that are working on developing biomarkers of aging to quantify aging in humans. This is absolutely critical, because if you're able to quantify, biological age, you're able to then move on and develop clinical trials for aging. And then licensing, there's companies that are licensing software that help other companies to better identify potential therapeutics and pathways related to aging. So there's a lot of value there as well. And either way, I think this is the most common, but there's just many different sort of plays in this industry. And then just kind of to summarize, give an overview of a little bit more of the sort of the hype that's been going around. This is actually something that is going on right now. Today is the first day as we speak. There is a session. There's basically a pop-up city that's occurring in Berkeley, California. It's called Bay. A lot of attendees. It's going to be an 8-week sort of, longevity zone is what they call it. So, they're going to have a lot of people that are interested in the space and want to do something, and share ideas. They're going to have, a lot of people sort of staying together, and living and working together, and conferences, and some of the key thought leaders in the space, are invited to speak over the course of the 8 weeks. So, there's a movement towards that. And then there's another example is another sort of pop-up city, similar concept, that was, in 2023, and there are several others as well. So, yeah, so that's a lot, but sort of stepping back, the idea, and is, hopefully this shows that there's a lot of hype in longevity biotech. There's a lot of interest, and it's just it's grown very quickly. So, taking a step back, the question is, well, what's going on? Like, why now? Is it just hype? Is it actually the start of a new era? Like, should we all be really investing our time, our energy, our funds, our resources and knowledge into longevity biotech? Like, is this, is this sort of a next big thing? And so I'll touch on these, and we'll start with sort of stepping back even further and kind of looking at, sort of in perspective of the history of how this all came to be. And so I'll start with that. And yeah, so, taking a step back, as we've, sort of mentioned, for the longest time, we didn't think that aging was modifiable. Man's search for the quote unquote fountain of youth or elixir of life has been thought of as, sort of tale as old as time, right? For millennia or more, people have wanted to find something that can slow down or delay or reverse even aging. And to give you perspective, our human species has been around for about 300,000 years. Longevity biotech industry first emerged in the early 2010s, although it hasn't picked up steam until, let's say 5 years or less ago. And then we see here, sort of an image of a timeline. This is just, the 2025 years AD. And this represents less than 1% of the timeline of the species. So it's very, very new, compared to basically, most of the time that humanity has been around, which is just a very unique time to be alive, and watch all these advances. So we're basically, if we think about it in perspective, we're kind of at this, one way to think about it is we're at this sort of inflection point of artificial intelligence advances, inflection point of advances in technology that have enabled us to collect very, very large amounts of biological and biomedical data, in unprecedented ways, and in advances and breakthroughs in longevity science. And so, this Venn diagram is just one image, not necessarily the best way to describe this, but it helps. And you can think of, for example, the AI in drug discovery space as sort of the convergence between access to huge amounts of data and the ability of us to have these really great artificial intelligence models that can work with the data, because AI, machine learning, thrives off of big data, right? And so there's this intersection here, and now there's this sort of new intersection where a lot of longevity science is also sort of coming into the mix, and we're seeing AI drug discovery focused on longevity, and that's longevity biotech. So yeah, so and just preface to say that's not all of longevity biotech. There's also, by the way, a lot of longevity biotech that is in AI. So just to emphasize that as well. So here, taking another sort of step back, to try to visualize these advances over time, I set up this timeline just so that you can kind of see, and this is obviously, there's so many advances. This is just pinpointing a couple key ones. You can see that, at least visually, there's been a lot more in the very, very recent decades. And this is, arguably one of the earliest 1955 or so earliest times that AI and longevity science sort of started to, we started to see the first advances. So, stepping back again, I'm going to start off with, basically running through some of the just select few key advances in across the decades, and so that we can kind of picture how this all came to be. So let's start off with, basically arguably probably the first time that it was ever found in the history of, science, that lifespan is actually modifiable. And that lifespan is modifiable. And this was in a 1935 study that shows that caloric restriction basically extends the lifespan of rats. So think about, putting rats on a diet. They found that this extended their lifespan. And advances that came afterwards were, as we saw in the previous diagram, into the 1950s and mid 1950s to 1960s. And notably, and this is important, one of the major advances was the first time that cellular senescence, this thing called cellular senescence, was first characterized. So an overview of what this is, and again, there are many facets to the biology of aging, but I'm just emphasizing this because it's going to come up more and more over the decades. Basically, is a senescent cell is ultimately a cell that is not a normal cell, but it's basically a cell that has ultimately stopped dividing. It is now releasing a lot of inflammatory markers, and it basically behaves like a kind of age cell. And over time, with age, we accumulate a lot of these senescent cells as we get older. Right. And these occur throughout our bodies, right? So they can occur in the skin, they can occur in the lung tissue, in the cardiac tissue, in the brain, just kind of everywhere. We get our normal cells starting to, turn into these senescent cells. Now, senescence isn't necessarily a bad thing, because there could be some positive functions, right, for sure. But the key is that there is, in many types of these cells, there is a release of inflammatory markers. So this is generally not good for the environment around these cells. And it's generally sort of a pro-aging related phenotype or a pro-aging related environment, right? So, yeah. So then, additional findings, we just kind of start to develop some of the first theories of aging. In terms of AI, artificial intelligence breakthroughs, we actually see the terms artificial intelligence, machine learning that were first coined in this decade, which is it's very, very important because, see where we are today, everyone kind of knows about these terms. And yeah, and that was basically that decade. So what happens next is basically an AI winter, which is what it's coined by it seems it's being coined sort of like this AI winter, right? And that happens in the coming decades, right? In these decades through mid 1980s or so, where we don't see a lot of advances in AI, right, in machine learning, and we don't see a lot of major sort of pivotal advances in the space, just that are sort of groundbreaking, paradigm shifting, etc. And arguably, when you think of longevity science as well, we don't see that either during this decade, right, or these 2 decades. But what we do see is some really critical advances in technology for collecting biological data. So, for example, we have basically PCR, polymerase chain reaction. It's so famous. If you have taken an introductory biology class, even in high school, you probably learned about PCR. And so this was first introduced in this decade. So we started to see some advances, and now in the following decade, right, we actually start seeing some more advances, major pivotal advances in both longevity science and in AI. So we're in this decade now here, and we're seeing this important discovery. This is by someone who won the Nobel Prize later for her work and her contributions. Elizabeth Blackburn found that she discovered this enzyme, or this protein basically called telomerase. So to give you some background on what this means, we think about, what are telomeres, right? They're important for aging, or they're relevant to aging. So we think about, for example, the cell, and we look at the nucleus within the cell, right? It's where the DNA is hosted. This is an example of, packaged DNA, and we can see at the end of this is called chromosome, right? At the end of the chromosome, we see these things called telomeres. And basically what happens, and we learned this actually, way back, is that telomeres actually shorten over time as the, cell divides. And this is seen with aging, right? But telomerase is a factor, right, a protein within the cells that can actually extend the length of the telomeres. And so this was important, and this was sort of, this sort of shows, it gives us more information about, this part of a component or facet of aging that was discovered, and how it can be modulated by some inherent factors, by elongating this telomeres over time. Anyways, just moving forward, a lot of other discoveries in terms of genes relevant to aging. On the AI side, I'm not going to list all these names, but there's some, famous names of people that are, obviously influential and very well known today in the field, who have started to contribute in these days to artificial intelligence breakthroughs. And then for data breakthroughs, we see the beginnings of adopting electronic health records in hospitals. And this is really, really huge for availability of large-scale medical data, because at that point, before that, everything is in paper, right? Now that you have things that are slowly starting to get become electronic, electronic records now, this paves the road and allows for the availability of very, very large amounts of data that will decades later, be leveraged for, machine learning analyses and advances that we have today. We also see DNA sequencing machines and a lot of other advances that allow us to collect more data at scale. So going into 1995 to 2005, we see advances like the famous completion of the Human Genome Project. Now we understand the human genome, and we've sort of mapped it out in a sense. We on the AI side, developed the first language models. Later this will be built on to develop the first LLMs, which are used today in major, transformers is, basically in other major models that are heavily used nowadays. And then we also see another sort of pivotal moment in the field where IBM's Deep Blue wins at chess, so beats chess, one of the champions of chess in 1997. So, and other advances in longevity, but again, it's not going to go into all the details. It's just, things are continuing to grow. Another important thing to know about one of the enabling technologies is access to the internet. Where, before 2000s, we didn't really have a way to have electronic, like just papers like you could view online. You had to wait until the journal gets delivered or go to the library. And so now with access to large amounts of paper, basically, peer-reviewed science at your fingertips, research has been able to advance much, much faster as well. So that's also worth saying. When we look at the, PubMed publications over the years, I mean, they really start to like skyrocket pretty exponentially. So that's another enabling technology to note. Okay, so let's step into the 2000s. So this is starting about 20 years ago now, industry first starts to really catch on with these advances. So we have some advances in data, as we have, basically every data collection that we have basically every decade. And then we have a bunch of advances in longevity science as well. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but the important one that I will emphasize is in 2006, there's this, this researcher, Shinya Yamanaka. He later won the Nobel Prize for this. He was the one, his team first discovered that you is any cell, and this is really important actually for some of what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is you can take any cell in the body and you can basically reprogram it into what we call, a stem cell, which is a cell that can turn into any other cell. And a stem cell also has no signs of aging, right? That's an important also piece to this, right? So this guy won the Nobel Prize for this. Stem cells are huge nowadays, and these are induced pluripotent stem cells that we're talking about. I'm going to run through this very briefly, but this was also when the first longevity biotech startups started to emerge, with Unity Biotech focused on senescence that we just discussed, and they launched in 2011. I believe they were the first longevity biotech company to come into play. And then a few others, and these were all, importantly, they were all based on the science that had already been there, right? So they're not using any, at least at this early stage, they're not using any advanced computational approaches. They're not using machine learning or AI for this. They're using established science that had been accrued in the longevity space up until that point in time, right? And then kind of going on to the AI space, we see, of course, a lot of advances there, and we also see the first AI and drug discovery startups that emerge. So this is, in 2012, we see a few famous names. This company, Exscientia, has recently been acquired by this company here, Recursion, who IPO'd. I'm happy to talk more about sort of this industry and how it has evolved over the years since it first sort of launched, because there have been some major changes to the business models and the playbooks that these companies have followed over the past, let's say, 10 years. But right now, happy to discuss with, their questions and go into it later. But right now I'm going to move on to talk more about the next decade. And this is the past 10 years. So in the past 10 years, in a nutshell, we see advances in seeing the release of very, very large population level biobanks. So we're seeing access to huge amounts of electronic health records data, genomic and other omic data, and physiological data and medical images from over 500,000 patients. And this is just one of the biobanks. We're seeing a lot of others that pop up, and this is later going to be used. I mean, actually, in this decade, this is being used, right, for various, a huge, massive, and growing amount of computational analyses. And actually, this was part of what I did grad school on. But we're also seeing wearables for health tracking. Again, huge amounts of data where you can collect data on any individual who's wearing this. You can collect their heart rate data and other data just over time. That's also adding to the ability to then use this data later in large scale computational models. We're seeing automated liquid handlers. That's just an example. Now we're able to pipette things really quickly if we need to, just with robotics. And then we're also seeing, novel new models that are based on AI. And this is very, very, very big in the AI drug discovery space, where we're seeing these models that can predict structure of molecules. This is, AlphaFold. Yeah, it's made a huge, huge impact in the space. So, I will also mention that in the past decade, specifically in the past year, we've also seen some of the first, basically the first AI designed and discovered small molecule drug that has successfully completed phase 2A clinical trials. This is by a company called In Silico Medicine. They actually did initially focus on the hallmarks of aging to develop their AI models. And they're following this sort of longevity play. If you see their pipeline, their drug is first being targeted for this disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, but they have another in the pipeline with the same drug, right? So we're looking at sort of the potential for this to become a true longevity biotech AI developed and designed drug, which is really big. And the really important note that I would emphasize is that we talk about AI and drug discovery and how AI can accelerate timelines. It just took 18 months for In Silico Medicine to develop and run through clinical trials with this drug. And just compare that for a moment with the standard timelines in the drug discovery space overall. We're talking about 10 years and over $1 billion to get one successful drug. Now, this is just phase 2 clinical trials, phase 2A specifically. So we have yet to see how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost them specifically to get through. And we don't even know if it's going to be successful in phase 3. So we have yet to see, but this is a really, really great example of huge amounts of success and efficiency that a company has obtained. And this is just last year. So moving on to back to the same decade, we can look at some additional advances in longevity science. And we also can then look at one of the clinical trials that has emerged. So remember when I was talking about the first study on caloric restriction in rats, well, finally in 2019, it was done in humans. And it also showed, improvements in cardiometabolic aging related parameters, I believe. So the final thing on the scientific side that I'm going to really emphasize, this is making waves in the space, is this thing called partial epigenetic reprogramming. In other words, also known as in some capacity as some form of cellular rejuvenation. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit because it's just such a hot space. Senescence and senolytics are also hot, but not as much as this. So again, remember I was talking about reprogramming and Yamanaka and all that. He was the one that discovered that just ignore the OSCAM. These are the names of the factors, right? Put some factors into a cell, any cell of any age, really. And then he discovered that you can convert that cell into a pluripotent stem cell, right? An induced stem cell. Now, what was discovered in 2016 by a group, a research group, was that actually there is a way to put some of these factors in and only go part of the way through, right? So this is a cell that, let's say you have a skin cell or a lung cell, and instead of going all the way to a stem cell, you're actually going to the in-between. So you're staying as a skin cell, but now this skin cell is completely youthful. And this is very, very different when we think about, senolytics, right? And senescence. Senolytics, those are drugs that are trying to kill those senescent cells that I talked about before. Those kind of like different, they're not the same as a, standard cell, but they're kind of like aged, producing a lot of inflammation, right? And senolytics, they try to get rid of those cells. These, therapies that are trying to do reprogramming, they're trying to change the function of older cells, right? And make them act and look like youthful versions of themselves. So this is huge, and there are a lot of companies that have popped up that are working in this space. So let's go into briefly, I guess, briefly the tradition, so the longevity biotech space. And I just want to give you an overview, at least like just like a big picture understanding of kind of like what this field looks like. I'm not going to show every single company because it's a lot, but just some of the ones that stood out. So a bunch of senescence or senolytic companies, these are focused very much on these senescent cells that I talked about. There's, like I showed before, a lot of companies that are working on reprogramming or cellular rejuvenation. And then there are a lot of companies, and there are many, many more than just these, that are focused on various other components or hallmarks of aging, right? And I just want to emphasize that these on the left are actually just traditional, they're traditional drug discovery companies to a large extent. Their main business models or their technological their platforms, they're not focused on AI. So now we're like I was showing before, we're kind of seeing this wave of AI drug discovery companies, and this is now infiltrating into longevity. So now we're seeing a lot of new longevity biotechs that are focused on that. So Integrated Biosciences, Rubito, they're focused on senescence. A couple others focused on reprogramming, and many, many others that are focused on other hallmarks of aging. And these are all AI-driven drug discovery companies. And just to give you another comparison, so we see within just AI drug discovery companies, we see longevity biotech, right? These are a few or many of the ones that I found. But then we also look at, it's just the general drug discovery AI space, right? Companies that are, not specifically focused on longevity, but they're focused on specific diseases and so forth, or several different diseases or platforms. And so this is obviously a huge, huge space. These are by all means not the only companies or even just all the main companies that are in the space. But just to give you a comparison, there's way, way, way more also in this area, in biotech in general. So stepping back, almost done with the presentation. We see here, this is just like a nice visual, although it's a bit overwhelming, but we already went through roughly everything. This is just a visual of kind of showing how there's been so much, growth over time in these different research areas. And then we look at the hallmarks of aging. I'm happy to talk and walk through some of those if there are questions. But basically, this was a study published in 2023 that basically goes through an overview of the different components and biological mechanisms through which aging occurs. And also, this diagram is meant to show how aging is sort of central, in these pathways and these mechanisms are very central. They're not necessarily, of course, not the only factors, but they're very central to a lot of chronic diseases. I want to then finally just kind of remind you of this definition, which I really like. I think this is a really nice definition that summarizes longevity biotech in a nutshell. And I want to almost end with this idea, and this idea has been posed in within my network that this question that as we're seeing a lot of GLP-1 agonists coming out for obesity, but there is also research that shows that they can be beneficial for other conditions. And so, one question that has been posed is, well, could it be that these might be some of the first true longevity drugs that are already in the clinic, right? And we have yet to really see, because there's a lot more research that needs to be done, but just an interesting thought. And then, kind of going back to our main question, is this hype, or is this the start of a new era? And why now? I think we answered why now. In terms of hype versus start of a new era, just to give you perspective again, we first discovered rejuvenation is possible less than 10 years ago. This is literally less than 0.003% of the history of humanity. So the science is there. Is aging a fact of life? Clearly now we know it can be modified. So yeah, I think that it is, because a lot of this is grounded by science and by research and true technological advances. I do think that it is the time to start investing in longevity biotech. Yeah, and investing resources, investing your time if you have new ideas, energy, skills, everything that we can to kind of start pouring into this space. And that's it. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit delayed.